He didn't shout, beg, or swing. He stepped between a billionaire and his wife, lifted a steady finger by the fountain, and said the one word that could blow a life open: enough. To onlookers, it was rebellion from a Gardner schooling a billionaire. But little did they know that this simple word had been planted months ago, watered with patience, and was about to bloom into a truth that would bring an empire to its knees. This is the story of Martins Adeyemi, a poor black man who came to the Anderson estate to tend roses and ended up saving a life the cameras were trained to ignore. After you hear this story, you'll understand why the powerful fear the invisible. But I must warn you, this story will leave you breathless, angry, and ready to believe that even the smallest seed can split a stone. So, if you haven't subscribed yet, do that now and share this with anyone who's ever been told they don't matter. Grab something to drink, settle in, because we're about to walk through gates that were designed to keep the truth out, and watch what happens when a gardener decides to let it in. Martins Adeyemi was a man with calloused hands and a stubborn promise. He'd been trained in horticulture and environmental systems, could wire irrigation sensors as easily as he could prune heirloom roses. But when his landscaping firm collapsed, none of that mattered. He walked the streets for weeks, resume in hand, skills going to waste. Every door closed. Every interview led nowhere. And he'd started to wonder if he'd ever work in his field again. Then one evening, his phone rang. The voice on the other end was polite, businesslike. "Mr. Adeyemi, your application has been reviewed. We'd like to offer you a position." Martin straightened, hope flaring in his chest. "Which company is this? What position?" There was a pause. "The Anderson estate. The groundskeeper role. You applied 2 months ago." Groundskeeper, not systems manager. Not landscape architect. Groundskeeper. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. Never leave a place worse than you found it. He closed his eyes and made peace with what survival required. "Yes, ma'am. I'll be there. Thank you." The next morning, Martins arrived at an address that didn't match the modest suburban listings he'd been scanning. The gates alone were taller than his last apartment. Beyond them stretched fountains, sculpted hedges, rose beds arranged like art installations, and a main house that looked like it belonged in a magazine, not a neighborhood. He stood at the service entrance, documents in hand, wondering if he'd made a mistake. Then she appeared. A black SUV glided through the gates, and a woman stepped out. Tailored navy suit, heels sharp enough to puncture egos, movements crisp with the kind of confidence money buys and maintains. She didn't look at Martin so much as assess him, the way you'd assess a tool. "You're the new groundskeeper?" Her tone wasn't unkind, just distant, transactional. "Yes, ma'am. Martins Adeyemi." She gestured vaguely toward a path that curved past the main garden. "Your quarters are there. The small structure by the east wall. Orientation materials are inside. I expect the lawns mowed by Thursday and the rose beds dead-headed weekly. Questions?" "No, ma'am." "Good. And one more thing." She turned back, sunglasses still on. "My husband values privacy and order. You'll see us coming and going, you'll hear things, but you won't repeat them. Understood?" "Understood." "Welcome to the Anderson estate, Martins. Don't disappoint us." She walked toward the main house without waiting for a reply. Martins found his quarters exactly where she'd indicated. A converted shed with peeling paint, a cot, a hot plate, and a window that overlooked the garden's service road. It was smaller than his last place. Dirtier, too, but it had a roof, and right now, that was enough. He dropped his bag and whispered to the empty room, "Never leave a place worse than you found it." He had no idea how literally he'd end up keeping that promise. Over the following weeks, Martins learned the rhythms of the estate. Carlos Anderson, the Carlos Anderson, tech and finance billionaire whose face appeared on magazine covers and charity galas, rarely acknowledged him. When he did, it was with the kind of glance you'd give a piece of furniture. Functional, forgettable, beneath notice. His wife, Rose, was different. She moved through the garden like a ghost, beautiful but untethered. Her designer dresses always perfectly pressed, her smiles always just a beat too slow. Martins met her properly one morning by the marble fountain. She stood motionless, fingers hovering over the water but never quite touching it, as if afraid it might burn. "Morning, ma'am," Martins said gently, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, startled anyway. "Oh, you're the new Gardner." "Yes, ma'am. Martins." "Rose." She offered a thin smile. "You don't have to call me ma'am." He nodded, sensing the loneliness in that correction. "The roses are coming in beautifully this season. If you'd like, I can show you how to handle them without bruising the petals." Her eyes softened, just for a moment. "I'd like that." He demonstrated, cupping a bloom with both hands, supporting the stem. She mimicked him, her movements tentative, and when the flower stayed intact, she smiled. A real one this time, quick and nervous, like she'd forgotten how. But the smile faded the instant they heard footsteps on the limestone path. Carlos appeared, phone pressed to his ear, voice smooth and commanding. "Tell them it's non-negotiable. I don't care what their board thinks. We move forward next quarter, or we move on." He ended the call and finally noticed them. His gaze lingered on Rose, then flicked to Martins with cold assessment. "Everything in order here?" "Yes, sir," Martins said evenly. "Good. Rose, we have that donor lunch in an hour. Go get ready." It wasn't a request. Rose's shoulders tightened, but her voice stayed soft. "Of course." Carlos walked away, already on another call. Rose looked at Martins, and for a split second he saw it. Fear, moving like a shadow across her face. Then she smoothed it away, wrapped her arms around herself despite the warm sun, and followed her husband inside. Martins stood there, bloom still in his hand, and thought, something here is very wrong. He started paying attention, not to the grand parties or the expensive cars, but to the small things. The things people miss when they're not looking for them. He noticed how Rose flinched when Carlos raised his voice, even in laughter, how she wore long sleeves in summer, how certain cameras on the east lawn would suddenly malfunction whenever she walked past, how the security team moved with choreographed precision, but never for her, only around her. And Martins, who'd spent years reading soil and root systems, began reading something far more sinister: the architecture of control. He pulled out an old field notebook, the kind he used to map irrigation lines, and started a new project. Some pages were still dedicated to root systems and seasonal rotations, but others were different. A smashed vase that Rose called the wind. A purple bruise she blamed on a doorway. A torn sleeve she attributed to the dog. Martins didn't ask questions, not yet. He just wrote, dated, documented, and waited. Because he'd learned something crucial in his years tending living things. You don't rush growth. You prepare the ground. You plant carefully. And when the time is right, you let the truth break through the surface on its own. What Martins didn't know yet was that the time was coming sooner than he thought. And when it did, he'd have to make a choice that would either bury him or let a woman finally breathe free. But that moment was still weeks away. For now, he was just the gardener, invisible and patient, watching the estate's perfect surface for cracks. Martins had always thought in systems. Even as a child, he'd seen patterns where others saw chaos. The way rain followed certain cloud formations, how roots spread toward water sources, why some plants thrived in shade while others withered. His mother used to laugh and call him "my little engineer," watching him diagram the neighborhood's drainage problems on notebook paper. That training never left him. And now, standing in the Anderson estate's equipment shed at dawn, he was putting it to use in ways his horticulture professors never intended. The irrigation control panel hung on the wall like a nerve center, wires color-coded and labeled in neat print. Martins traced the lines with his finger, following the network that fed water to every corner of the grounds. But his eyes weren't on the irrigation anymore. They were on the thin, black cables running parallel to the water lines, the estate's security camera system. He pulled out his field notebook and began sketching. Not rose beds this time, but signal paths, camera positions, angles of coverage, and more importantly, the gaps. The east lawn. Camera swivels away every 40 seconds. The citrus walk. 2-minute delay on motion detection. The service gate. No coverage at all between 6 and 7 p.m. during shift change. The fountain area. Perfect surveillance, except when someone manually disables it. Martins circled that last note twice. Manual override meant intention. It meant someone was watching and choosing when not to. He closed the notebook and got to work. Over the next 2 weeks, Martins became two people. By day, he was the quiet groundskeeper, trimming hedges, fertilizing beds, nodding respectfully when Carlos's SUV roared past. But in the early mornings and late evenings, when the estate settled into its wealthy silence, he became something else, an architect of truth. He started small. A humidity sensor nestled among the climbing roses near the east wing, its casing modified to hold a micro camera no bigger than a shirt button. Another in the citrus grove, disguised as a soil moisture probe. A third mounted inside a decorative birdhouse he'd built himself, positioned with a clear view of the fountain and the path leading to the main house. The cameras were passive, motion-triggered, recording only when someone moved through their field of vision. And they didn't feed into the estate's network. Martins had learned that lesson early. Anything on Anderson's system could be deleted, manipulated, or disappeared. Instead, the feeds uploaded directly to cloud storage through a concealed mobile hotspot he'd installed in the birdhouse's false bottom. Off estate. Untouchable. Time-stamped and encrypted. The garden was learning to see. Martins was rerouting a cable sleeve near the back terrace when he heard boots on gravel behind him. "That line goes to the south cameras." He didn't flinch. He'd known Dale was there, had heard the security chief's deliberate footsteps from 20 yards out. Martins kept working, pulling wire through the conduit with steady hands. "I know," Martins said evenly. "Splice corroded. Water got in during last week's storm. I'm replacing the damaged section." Dale stepped closer, close enough that Martins could see his reflection in the man's sunglasses. The security chief was built like someone who'd done serious time in the military. Broad shoulders, economy of movement, and a face that gave nothing away. "You know a lot about camera systems for a gardener." "I know a lot about systems, period." Martins met his gaze calmly. "Irrigation, lighting, surveillance, it's all just networks and nodes. You learn to read one, you can read them all." Silence stretched between them. Martins could feel Dale calculating, weighing what he knew against what he was willing to admit he knew. Finally, the security chief spoke, his voice quieter now. "That corroded splice you're fixing? I don't remember it being in the maintenance log. Must have been an oversight. Must have been." Dale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he did something Martins didn't expect. He looked away first. "Make sure you test it when you're done. Don't want any more glitches." He walked away without another word, leaving Martins crouched by the cable box, heart pounding but hands still steady. Dale had seen exactly what Martins was doing, and he'd chosen to pretend he hadn't. Guilt, Martins realized, had a sound. It sounded like boots walking away from the truth. The patterns became impossible to ignore. Tuesday, 3:47 p.m. Rose stumbles on the terrace stairs. The nearest camera pans away at 3:46. She clutches her wrist. Later, she wears a silk scarf wrapped around it like a bracelet. Thursday, 11:20 a.m. Raised voices in the West Wing. The audio feed for that section goes silent for 18 minutes. When Martin sees Rose afterward, she's moving carefully, one hand pressed to her ribs. Saturday, 6:05 p.m. Rose crosses the east lawn toward the garden, moving fast, looking over her shoulder. The camera that should track her goes dark. Martins finds her behind the tool shed, the blind spot he'd marked in his notebook, makeup smudged, breathing shallow. She won't meet his eyes. "I tripped," she whispers. "I'm clumsy." But Martin sees the finger marks blooming purple on her forearm, 4 distinct impressions, like someone had grabbed and squeezed. He sees the way her hands shake when she tries to smooth her hair. He sees the truth her words keep trying to bury. "Mrs. Anderson." "Rose," her voice cracks. "Please, just Rose." "Rose," he says gently. "You don't have to keep falling." She looks at him then, really looks, and for a moment he thinks she might speak, might finally say the word that's been choking her. But footsteps approach, the head groundskeeper making rounds, and the moment shatters. Rose straightens, smooths her dress, and the mask slides back into place. "Thank you for your concern, Martins. I'll be more careful." She walks away, and Martins adds another entry to his notebook. Saturday, 6:05. East lawn. 4 fingers. Camera blackout. "I tripped." The garden was seeing everything now. The question was whether anyone would believe what it witnessed. The pushback started subtly, then escalated. First, whispers among the staff. Martins could feel eyes on him when he walked through the service areas, hear conversations that stopped when he entered a room. Someone had started a rumor that the gardener was too friendly with Mrs. Anderson, that he watched her, that he was overstepping. Then Carlos fired Maria, the housekeeper who'd worked the estate for 6 years. He called her into his office and dismissed her in under 3 minutes, his voice cold and clinical. "Loyalty issues," he announced to the remaining staff afterward, his smile sharp. "I expect everyone here to remember who signs their paychecks and to mind their own business." The message was clear. See nothing, say nothing, or you're next. That afternoon, Martins overheard 2 kitchen staff talking in hushed tones. "He's going to get himself fired, messing around like that. Or worse, Anderson doesn't play. You saw what happened to Maria." Martins kept his head down and kept working. Let them whisper. Let them think he was reckless or obsessed. The truth didn't need their permission to exist. 3 days later, the event planners arrived. Martins watched from the rose beds as they measured sight lines, placed out stakes for tents, and argued over optimal positions for the stage. The annual charity gala, Anderson's pet project, a spectacle designed to polish his philanthropic image, while donors wrote checks and posed for photos. One planner, a woman with a tablet and a measuring tape, stopped near the fountain. "AV tent goes here," she called out. "Perfect angle for the live feed. We'll get the fountain, the rose beds, and the main terrace all in frame." Martins noted the position. From that tent, you could see everything: the central fountain, the pathways, the east lawn. You could see the blind spots, too, if you knew where to look. And if someone rerouted the feed, you could show the world what those blind spots had been hiding. He smiled to himself and returned to deadheading roses, already calculating cable runs and signal paths in his mind. The garden was about to have a voice, and it was going to speak at exactly the right moment. That night, back in his quarters, Martins reviewed the footage his hidden cameras had captured. Most of it was mundane: gardeners working, staff passing through, birds landing on fountains. But then, at timestamp 17:42:11, a clip from the East Lawn camera. Carlos, alone with Rose by the hedge line. His hand shoots out, grips her arm. She tries to pull away. He jerks her closer, his face inches from hers, and speaks. The audio is faint, but Martins enhances it, leans in close to his laptop speakers. Carlos's voice, low and venomous. "You are mine. Do you understand? Mine. You don't smile at the help. You don't confide in anyone. You exist because I allow it." Martins stopped the playback, his hands trembling with a rage so quiet it felt like prayer. He saved the file, encrypted it, backed it up 3 times. Then he opened his notebook and wrote one sentence: "The garden sees everything. Now we make it speak." Outside, the roses continued their silent watch, petals soft but roots deep, waiting for the moment they'd finally be heard. Rose Anderson had learned to disappear inside her own life. It hadn't always been this way. Once, she'd been Rose Kimani, a grad student with opinions, friends who called at midnight just to laugh, a tiny apartment where she could walk around barefoot and leave dishes in the sink without apologizing. She'd had a future that belonged to her, full of possibilities she could name. Then she met Carlos at a university fundraiser. He was magnetic, successful, 20 years older, and utterly certain of himself. He called her luminous. He sent flowers to her lectures. He made her feel like she'd been chosen for something extraordinary. The engagement happened fast. The wedding is faster. And somewhere between the 12-page spread in Vanity Fair and the honeymoon in Santorini, Rose stopped being a person and became a portrait. Beautiful, silent, perfectly framed. Her friends drifted away first, or maybe she did. Carlos had opinions about them. That one's jealous. This one's using you. They don't understand our world. The invitations stopped coming. Her phone grew quiet. And when she tried to reach out, there was always a reason she couldn't. A charity event to prepare for. A donor dinner that needed her presence. Carlos's schedule that required her availability. Public adoration replaced private connection. Strangers recognized her at restaurants, complimented her dress, her grace, her luck. "You're living the dream," they'd say, and Rose would smile the smile she'd perfected. Warm, but not too warm. Gracious, but distant enough to end the conversation. No one asked if the dream ever felt like drowning. The bruises started small. A grip too tight during an argument. A shove that he immediately apologized for. "I'm under so much pressure, Rose." You know how the investors are. I didn't mean it. Then the apologies came with gifts. Diamond earrings. A spa weekend. A new car with her name on the registration. The price of forgiveness, wrapped in velvet and delivered with fresh promises. And slowly, Rose learned the choreography. Provoke nothing, anticipate everything, exist in the spaces between his moods like a dancer who'd memorized every dangerous step. She learned that love, in Carlos's language, meant ownership. The morning after Martins captured the audio by the hedge line, though Rose didn't know about that yet, Carlos appeared in her dressing room with an expression she'd learned to read like weather. The storm had passed, and now came the performance of remorse. Rose. His voice was soft, contrite. He held a jewelry box in one hand and an iPad in the other. I was terrible yesterday. The board meeting didn't go well, and I took it out on you. That's not the man I want to be. Rose met his eyes in the mirror, her hands still on the vanity. She didn't speak. Words, she'd learned, were traps. Carlos set the jewelry box down beside her perfume bottles. I want to make it right. I've scheduled a press event for next week, by the fountain, during the gala setup. We're announcing a major donation to Safe Harbor Women's Shelter. He smiled, the one that had charmed investors and photographers for 2 decades. $500,000, Rose, and I want you beside me when we present the check. Show the world what partnership looks like. The irony was so sharp, it could draw blood. A donation to a women's shelter. From the man who made sure she couldn't leave. That's generous, Rose managed, her voice barely above a whisper. We'll coordinate outfits, navy and cream, classic, elegant. The photographers will love it. He opened the jewelry box, revealing a pair of sapphire drop earrings that probably cost more than most people's yearly salary. These will look perfect on you. Rose stared at the earrings, at the way they caught the light, at the small price tag of her continued silence. Thank you. Carlos kissed the top of her head, a gesture that might have looked tender to anyone watching. I knew you'd understand. You always do. He left, and Rose sat very still, looking at her reflection. The woman in the mirror wore an expensive silk robe and had flawless skin, thanks to the makeup already applied to cover the bruise on her collarbone. She looked like someone who had everything. She looked like someone who'd forgotten how to scream. 2 days later, Martins found her in the citrus walk. Rose was pretending to examine the lemon trees, but really she was just trying to breathe in a space where the cameras couldn't see her cry. She heard footsteps and quickly wiped her eyes, straightening her posture. Mrs. Anderson, Rose. Martins approached carefully, the way you'd approach something wounded. I need to show you something. Martins, I don't think... He pulled a small phone from his pocket. Not a smartphone, just a basic flip phone, the kind you could buy with cash at any convenience store. It's clean, untraceable, and it has one number programmed in. A lawyer I know. Pro bono work. Specializes in cases like... He hesitated, choosing his words with visible care. Cases where someone needs help leaving a dangerous situation. Rose's heart seized. She looked around instinctively, checking for cameras, for security, for anyone who might report this conversation back to Carlos. I don't know what you think is happening, but... Rose. Martins's voice was gentle but firm. I've worked here long enough. I've seen enough. And I need you to know that whatever you decide, whenever you're ready, you have options. You have people who will help. No questions, no judgment. She stared at the phone in his outstretched hand, like it was a live grenade. Taking it meant admitting the truth. It meant crossing a line she couldn't uncross. It meant the possibility of escalation. And Carlos's escalations were the thing she feared most. If he finds out, he won't find it if you hide it well. And the numbers saved under garden supply, just in case. Rose's hands trembled. She thought about the press event by the fountain, about standing beside Carlos while he performed generosity for cameras. She thought about the sapphire earrings and the velvet boxes and the carefully constructed lie of her life. She took the phone. "Thank you," she whispered, closing her fingers around it like a secret. "I don't know if I can, but thank you." Martins nodded once, then walked away, leaving her alone with the weight of possibility. The morning of the press event, Rose stood before her closet, fingers trailing over fabric. Carlos had specified navy and cream. Classic, elegant, coordinated. She found the dress he meant, a navy floral midi dress with delicate detailing, the kind that would photograph beautifully beside the fountain and roses. She pulled it on and faced the mirror. The bruises had faded to yellow-green smudges on her upper arm and ribs, old enough to be almost gone, fresh enough to remind her how they got there. She reached for the concealer palette, the expensive one that covered everything, and began the ritual she'd perfected. Dab, blend, set. Dab, blend, set. Erase the evidence, smooth the surface. Within minutes, the bruises disappeared. The woman in the mirror looked flawless again. Rose's hand drifted to her clutch on the vanity, cream-colored, small, elegant. She'd already packed the essentials: lipstick, compact, tissues. And now, hidden in the interior pocket, where even Carlos wouldn't think to look, the burner phone Martins had given her. She stared at her reflection, at the mask she'd perfected, at the performance she was about to give. And for the first time in years, she felt something shift inside her. A small, quiet crack in the foundation of her silence. She leaned close to the mirror and whispered, so softly that even she barely heard it. Enough. Just the word. Just the possibility of it. But it felt like the first real breath she'd taken in years. The knock on her bedroom door made her jump. "Mrs. Anderson?" One of the house staff. "A delivery just arrived for you." Rose opened the door to find a courier box on the hallway table, black velvet, unmistakably expensive, tied with Carlos's signature cream ribbon. Her stomach dropped. She opened it slowly. Inside, nestled in white silk, was a diamond choker. Not a necklace, a choker, the kind that sat high and tight against the throat. The stones caught the light brilliantly, each one flawless and cold, and attached to the clasp, barely visible unless you looked closely, was a small metal component that didn't belong. Rose's hands shook as she recognized it. A GPS tracker. The note inside read, "For tonight. So I always know where you are. See." She stared at the choker, at the beautiful, suffocating thing that was both gift and shackle. Her hand moved instinctively to her throat, imagining the weight of it, the tightness, the tracking signal that would follow her everywhere. The burner phone in her clutch suddenly felt heavier. Rose closed the box and set it on the vanity, her reflection staring back, with eyes that had stopped pretending. The performance was about to begin. But for the first time, Rose wasn't sure whose script she'd be following. Dale Zimmerman had spent 23 years learning how to look away. It started in the military, classified operations where you followed orders and didn't ask what happened to the people in the black vans. Then private security for oil executives in unstable regions, where incident management meant making problems disappear before they reached the news cycle. By the time he landed at the Anderson estate, looking away had become muscle memory. He was good at his job. Too good, maybe. He knew how to reroute camera feeds with a keystroke, how to write incident reports that said everything and nothing, how to make a bruise sound like an accident in official documentation. Subject reported minor injury consistent with contact with door frame. No medical intervention required. Incident logged and closed. Euphemisms were easy. Easier than the alternative. The NDA templates lived in a locked folder on his desktop, ironclad agreements that staff signed before they ever set foot on the property. They covered everything: family matters, private conversations, household dynamics. The language was careful, lawyer-approved. Breach of confidentiality will result in immediate termination and legal action. Dale had handed those documents to gardeners, housekeepers, drivers, caterers, watched them sign away their right to speak, told himself it was just standard protocol for high-net-worth individuals. Privacy protection. Nothing sinister. But late at night, when the estate was quiet, and Dale reviewed the security logs, he knew exactly what he was protecting. And it wasn't privacy. He'd seen the patterns. The camera glitches that always happened at convenient times. The medical supply requisitions: butterfly bandages, arnica gel, concealer in shades that matched Mrs. Anderson's skin tone. The way Rose moved through the house like a woman perpetually braced for impact. Dale had 3 daughters, 2 in college, 1 in high school. He'd taught them self-defense, made them memorize emergency numbers, told them never to let anyone make them feel small. And then he came to work every day and made sure Rose Anderson had no way out. The cognitive dissonance sat in his chest like a stone. He was in the security office reviewing the gala preparations when Martins appeared in the doorway. Dale didn't look up from his monitor. Gardner's used the service entrance. I know. Martins stepped inside anyway and closed the door. This won't take long. Something in the man's tone made Dale finally turn. Martins held a tablet, one of those cheap Android models you could pick up at any electronics store. Not estate property, not connected to their network. You need to see something, Martins said quietly. I don't need to see anything that's not on official channels. You trained me to see angles, remember? When I was fixing that camera splice? Martins set the tablet on the desk, screen facing Dale. Now I need you to see this one. Dale's jaw tightened. He should have ended this conversation 30 seconds ago. Should have called for backup. Had Martins escorted off the property. But something stopped him. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the same guilt that had been accumulating for years, like compound interest. He looked at the screen. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Timestamp from 4 days ago. The East Lawn, golden hour light. Carlos and Rose by the hedge line, their body language all wrong, his aggressive, hers defensive. Then Carlos's hand shot out, gripped Rose's arm, jerked her close. Dale couldn't hear the audio through the tablet's small speaker, but he didn't need to. He could read Carlos's lips, see the fury in his posture, watch Rose try to pull away and fail. The clip lasted 11 seconds. It felt like 11 hours. Where did you get this? Dale's voice came out hoarse. Does it matter? It matters if you've been installing unauthorized surveillance on this property. Is that really what concerns you right now? Martins leaned forward, his voice still quiet, but edged with something harder. Because I've watched you, Dale. I've seen you accidentally delete logs. I've seen you route camera feeds away from certain areas at certain times. You know exactly what's happening here. you've known for years. Dale felt his face go hot. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Martin straightened. How many times have you written door frame in an incident report? How many camera malfunctions have you logged that weren't really malfunctions at all? How many NDAs have you handed out to keep people quiet? Each question landed like a blow. Dale's hands curled into fists on the desk. I have a job to do. I follow protocol. Protocol. Martins's laugh was bitter. You mean the protocol that makes you complicit? That makes you an accomplice. Watch yourself. Or what? You'll have me arrested for telling the truth? Martins gestured at the tablet. That footage is backed up in 6 different locations, none of which you can access. And there's more where that came from. Hours of it. Time-stamped, encrypted, irrefutable. Dale stared at the frozen image on the screen. Carlos's hand wrapped around Rose's arm, her face turned away in fear. He thought about his daughters. Thought about what he'd do if someone treated them this way. Thought about the man he'd believed himself to be before he started trading conscience for a paycheck. What do you want from me? He asked finally. 1 minute, Martins said. During the gala. The donor reel will be playing in the AV tent. I need 1 minute of access to reroute the feed. You're insane. Anderson will have you killed. Maybe. Or maybe the world will finally see what you've been helping him hide. Martins met his eyes. I'm not asking you to be a hero, Dale. I'm just asking you to look away one more time. But this time, look away from the wrong thing instead of the right one. The silence stretched between them. Outside, Dale could hear the event crew setting up tents, testing sound systems, calling out measurements. The gala was 3 days away. Carlos had already doubled the security detail, off-duty cops, private contractors, ex-military who didn't ask questions. Dale thought about the stone in his chest, about 23 years of looking away, about the line between protection and complicity that he'd crossed so gradually he hadn't noticed until he was miles past it. 1 minute, he heard himself say. During the donor montage, the AV tech takes a smoke break at 7:17. That's your window. Martins nodded once. Thank you. Don't thank me. If this goes wrong, I'll deny everything. And if it goes right, Dale's voice dropped. I'll probably lose everything anyway. Some things are worth losing everything for. Martins left, taking the tablet with him. Dale sat alone in the security office, staring at his monitors, watching the estate's perfect surfaces and hidden angles. For the first time in 23 years, he was going to look directly at something he'd spent his entire career avoiding. 2 hours later, Carlos summoned him to the study. The gala needs to be airtight, Carlos said, pouring himself scotch without offering Dale any. I've contracted additional security. 8 more men, all vetted. They'll handle perimeter and crowd control. Yes, sir. And Dale? Carlos turned, his expression unreadable. That Gardner, Martins, he's been acting strangely, too friendly with my wife, too interested in areas outside his scope. I want him controlled. Dale's stomach dropped. Controlled how? Watch him. If he steps out of line during the event, if he so much as looks at Rose wrong, remove him, quietly. Understood? Understood. Carlos smiled the smile that had closed billion-dollar deals. Good. I knew I could count on you. You've always understood the importance of discretion. Dale left the study feeling like he'd swallowed broken glass. He went back to his office, opened the security logs, and found the entry from earlier. The timestamp showing Martins entering the security wing, the notation of their conversation. His finger hovered over the delete key. 23 years of looking away, of choosing the paycheck over the truth, of telling himself that other people's pain wasn't his responsibility. He pressed delete. The log entry vanished. As far as the system was concerned, Martins had never been there. Their conversation had never happened. Dale had granted himself plausible deniability, but it felt nothing like relief. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text message with no sender ID. "We saw you hesitate." Dale's blood went cold. He looked around the empty office, at the camera in the corner. His own camera, part of his own system. Someone had been watching. Someone had seen him make the choice. The question was, who? And more importantly, were they on Martins's side or Carlos's? His phone buzzed again. "The gala will tell us which side you're really on." Dale set the phone down with shaking hands and stared at his monitors, watching the Anderson estate prepare for its most important performance yet. For the first time in his career, Dale Zimmerman wasn't sure he could control what happened next. And for the first time in years, that thought didn't terrify him as much as it should have. The Anderson estate had been transformed into a theater of wealth and virtue. White tents billowed across the lawn like sails, their interiors glowing with amber light from chandeliers that had been helicoptered in that morning. The donor wall stood near the entrance, a gleaming display of names etched in brass, each one representing 6 figures or more. Champagne towers caught the golden hour sun, liquid gold stacked in perfect geometry. Servers in black and white moved like choreographed dancers, trays balanced, smiles fixed. Martins watched it all from the rose beds, pruning shears in hand, invisible as always. The AV tent sat exactly where the event planners had marked it. Perfect sightline to the fountain, to the terrace, to the pathways where truth and performance would soon collide. Inside, he could see technicians testing feeds, adjusting angles, making sure every moment of Carlos Anderson's generosity would be captured in high definition. Lenses everywhere, cameras on tripods, on sliders, on drones hovering overhead. All those eyes, all that surveillance, and somehow still blind where it mattered most. Martins checked his watch. 7:04 p.m. 13 minutes until the donor montage. 13 minutes until Dale's 1-minute window. His phone buzzed. A text from a burner number he'd memorized and never saved. AV Tech on smoke break at 7:17. East entrance clear. 60 seconds, no signature. Didn't need one. Martins pocketed the phone and moved toward the service path. Just another member of the grounds crew ensuring the hedges looked perfect for the cameras. Inside the main tent, Rose stood beside Carlos, her hand resting lightly on his arm in a pose they'd perfected over the years. The diamond choker sat tight against her throat, its GPS chip pressed against her pulse point like a cold finger. The navy floral dress was photographed beautifully. Her makeup was flawless. Her smile was measured, warm enough to seem genuine, distant enough to maintain elegance. She'd played this role 100 times, but tonight, the burner phone weighed heavy in her clutch. And tonight, the word she'd whispered to her mirror that morning, "enough," kept echoing in her mind with every heartbeat. Donors circled, offering congratulations, praising the event's elegance, the couple's generosity. Carlos accepted it all with practiced humility, his hand occasionally tightening on Rose's arm when he wanted her to smile wider, stand straighter, perform better. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice boomed through the speakers, "if we could have everyone's attention, please. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson will be making their announcement shortly. But first, a brief video showcasing the incredible work of Safe Harbor Women's Shelter and the lives that will be changed by tonight's donation. Applause rippled through the crowd. The lights dimmed. Screens flickered to life. The donor montage beginning with sweeping shots of the estate, testimonials from shelter directors, statistics about domestic violence, rendered in elegant fonts over tasteful B-roll. Rose felt Carlos's grip loosen slightly as he turned to watch his own generosity play out in high definition. This was his favorite part, the public sanctification, the moment when money transformed reputation. She glanced toward the AV tent and saw, for just a second, a figure slip through the east entrance. Tall, steady, moving with purpose. Martins. The AV tent was a tangle of cables and monitors, racks of equipment humming with electricity. The tech had left his station exactly as Dale promised. Coffee cup still steaming, cigarette smoke drifting from the exit. 60 seconds. Martins moved fast. He'd memorized the layout during his irrigation inspections, had watched the technicians route the feeds, knew exactly which input controlled the main screens. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd wired far more complex systems than this. Unplug main feed. Insert signal splitter. Route backup feed to channel B. Override lockout with the bypass Dale had accidentally left unsecured. 45 seconds. On the monitors, the montage continued. Smiling shelter residents, statistics about safety. Carlos's previous charitable works. Safe, sanitized, carefully curated. Not anymore. Martins pressed execute. The screens flickered. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the image split. Live feed on the left, archival footage on the right. The contrast was surgical, devastating. Left side, the fountain, golden and pristine, exactly as the guests were seeing it now. Right side, the same fountain, 4 days earlier. Carlos gripping Rose's arm, Rose trying to pull away. The body language of violence rendered in 1080p. The gasp rippled through the crowd like a wave. "What?" someone started. The archival footage continued. Another clip, Rose stumbling on the terrace, camera panning away just before. Another, Carlos's hand clamping down on her wrist, his face contorted with rage. Another, the east lawn, the hedge line, the whispered threat that Martins's hidden cameras had captured in perfect audio. "You are mine!" The words boomed through the speakers, Carlos's voice unmistakable, possessive, venomous. 30 seconds. Martins unplugged his device, rerouted the feed back to normal, and slipped out the east entrance just as the AV tech's cigarette hit the ground outside. The montage resumed. Shelter testimonials, statistics, hope. But the spell was broken. The crowd wasn't watching the screens anymore. They were watching Carlos, watching Rose, watching the carefully constructed myth collapse in real time. Rose felt Carlos's hand on her arm go rigid, felt his entire body tense beside her like a coiled spring. Around them, the crowd had gone from polite applause to shocked silence to urgent whispers. "What the hell was that?" a donor hissed to her companion. "Did you see? Was that real? Oh my God, is she safe?" Phones lifted. Camera flashes started popping. Not the official photographers now, but guests documenting what they'd just witnessed, creating a record Carlos couldn't erase. The MC stammered into the microphone, trying to recover. "Ladies and gentlemen, we seem to have experienced a technical difficulty. If we could just..." "No," Rose's voice cut through the confusion. quiet but amplified by the mic clipped to her dress for the announcement. "There's no difficulty. You all saw what you saw." The crowd went silent. Every eye turned to her. Carlos leaned close, his smile fixed, but his whisper sharp as a blade. "Rose, don't you dare!" She stepped away from him. One step, then another, moving toward the microphone at center stage. Her legs trembled, but held. The diamond choker felt like it was strangling her. The GPS chip, broadcasting her exact coordinates to her husband's phone, but she kept moving. Rose took the microphone from the stunned MC's hands, looked out at the sea of faces, donors, journalists, staff members who'd looked away for years, and somewhere in the back, near the rose beds, Martins. She didn't cry, didn't break. She centered herself, spine straight, and spoke. "I am safe now." Her voice was clear, measured, each word deliberate. "And I will not be returning home with you." The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts, the rapid-fire click of cameras. Rose kept her eyes forward, refusing to look at Carlos, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her fear. Behind her, she heard him move, heard the shift in his breathing that meant the mask was slipping. "Rose," his voice started smooth, the public-facing tone, but halfway through her name, it curdled into something else, the snarl beneath the smile. "You ungrateful!" But the microphones caught it. The phones caught it. The drones overhead caught it. Carlos's perfectly crafted image fracturing in real time. He smiled for the cameras, a bark of a smile, all teeth and no warmth. Then his hand shot up, signaling someone in the crowd. One of the contractors Dale had mentioned. The man started moving toward the stage, and suddenly, abruptly, the screens went black. Not a flicker, not a technical glitch. A hard cutoff. The donor reel, the live feeds, everything. Killed. The tent plunged into relative darkness, only the chandeliers remaining. In the sudden quiet, Rose heard the crowd's murmur shift from shock to fear. Heard Carlos behind her, his voice low and dangerous. "You've made a terrible mistake." But all around them, phones lifted. Dozens of them, then hundreds. Personal devices, ungoverned, uncontrolled, recording everything. The official cameras might have gone dark, but the world was still watching. And this time, there was no one who could make the truth disappear. The darkness lasted 7 seconds. 7 seconds of Carlos signaling his contractors, of the crowd's murmurs rising to panicked chatter, of Rose standing alone at the microphone with her declaration hanging in the air like smoke. 7 seconds of phones lifting, recording, bearing witness to what the official cameras could no longer see. Then someone, a guest, a staff member, maybe Dale himself, overrode the blackout. The lights surged back, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating everything. And Carlos was already moving. He crossed the stage in 4 strides, his public mask completely gone now. His hand shot out and clamped down on Rose's arm, the same grip Martins had captured on camera. The same possessive violence now playing out in front of 300 witnesses. "We're leaving," Carlos hissed, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Now!" Rose tried to pull away. "Let go of me! You don't get to humiliate me like this! You don't get to—" "Sir," Dale appeared beside them, his voice professionally calm, but his body language tense, ready. "Sir, I think we should step away from the crowd. Let's talk privately." "Get out of my way, Dale." Carlos's voice was pure venom. I pay you to handle security, not to interfere in my marriage." But Dale didn't move. For the first time in 23 years, he planted his feet and held his ground. "Sir, everyone's watching. Let's not make this worse." Carlos's laugh was ugly, jagged. "Worse? My Gardner just sabotaged my event. My wife just humiliated me on camera. And you're worried about optics?" He jerked Rose toward the stage steps, heading for the fountain path, the scenic route the photographers had planned for the announcement walk. "Move, Tsarers, or you're fired." Dale hesitated for one crucial second, long enough for Carlos to drag Rose down the steps and onto the lawn. Long enough for Martins to move. He came from the rose beds, still holding his pruning shears, still wearing his work clothes stained with soil and chlorophyll. To the guests in their gowns and tuxedos, he must have looked exactly like he was. The help, the invisible man who tended the gardens while they drank champagne. But Martins had been invisible long enough. The golden hour sun turned everything amber and long-shadowed. The fountain, the roses, the limestone path where Carlos dragged Rose like she was property. The same path where Martins had first seen her months ago. Motionless over water, she didn't seem to see. Not anymore. Martins stepped into Carlos's path, directly between him and the fountain. He didn't raise his fists, didn't raise his voice. He raised one finger, steady, unshaking, and spoke the word that had started all of this. "Enough!" Carlos Oalites stopped, stared. His grip on Rose's arm loosened just slightly from pure shock. "What did you just say to me?" "I said enough." Martins held his ground, finger still raised, drawing every eye. "Let her go." Dale caught up, positioning himself at Carlos's shoulder. "Boss, please. Everyone's recording." "I don't care!" Carlos shoved past Dale, pulling Rose closer to his side. "You're fired, Dale. And you—" He jabbed a finger at Martins. "You're done. Security. Remove this man from my property immediately." But the security team didn't move. The contractors Carlos had hired stood frozen, uncertain, watching the phones recording from every angle, calculating whether following orders was worth ending up on the wrong side of a viral video. Martins took another step forward. He was close enough now to see the fear in Rose's eyes, close enough to see the white-knuckle grip Carlos had on her arm, close enough to see the diamond choker at her throat and understand exactly what it represented. "Let her go," Martins repeated, quieter now, but no less firm. "She said she's not going with you. Respect that." "Respect?" Carlos's face contorted with rage. "You're a Gardner. You're nobody. You think you can stand there and lecture me about respect in my own home? This stopped being about your home the moment you put your hands on her." The crowd had moved closer now, forming a loose semicircle around the fountain. 300 witnesses, phones lifted, breath held. The fountain kept running, its gentle music a strange counterpoint to the violence coiled in Carlos's posture. And then, from somewhere in the rose beds, from the hidden sensors Martins had installed weeks ago, motion detection triggered. The garden's eyes blinked alive. The audio came first. A crackle over the speakers, feedback whining for a split second before resolving into crystal clarity. Then Carlos's voice, not live, but recorded, time-stamped, irrefutable, boomed across the lawn from hidden speakers Martins had wired into the sound system during irrigation maintenance. "You are mine. Do you understand? Mine. You don't smile at the help. You don't confide in anyone. You exist because I allow it." The archival audio from the Hedgeline confrontation. Carlos's possessive snarl, stripped of context, laid bare. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Carlos's head whipped around, searching for the source, his face going from rage to panic in the span of a heartbeat. That's taken out of context. But the audio continued. Another clip, another moment of private violence made public. If you ever embarrass me like that again, I'll make sure you regret it. And another. You're nothing without me. Remember that. The fountain seemed to amplify it, water carrying sound the way it carries light, spreading the truth across the entire estate. "Turn it off!" Carlos roared at Dale. "Turn it off!" But Dale stood very still, his hand conspicuously away from his radio, and said nothing. Martins met Carlos's eyes and spoke, his voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. "This is domestic abuse." 4 words. Simple. Undeniable. "This is domestic abuse," Martins repeated. Louder now so the microphones caught it, so the phones recorded it, so everyone present would remember it. What you just heard, what you saw on those screens, what's happening right now, this is what abuse looks like. And all of you are witnesses. The phrase landed like a verdict. The crowd's murmur shifted instantly, no longer confusion or gossip, but recognition. Outcry. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "I knew something was wrong. How did we not see this?" A woman pushed through the crowd, older, elegant, wearing diamonds that probably cost more than Martins made in a year. She walked straight up to Carlos, her expression disgusted. "Let her go," the woman said, her voice shaking with fury. "I have 3 daughters. If anyone treated them the way you've been treating your wife, I'd—" She stopped, composed herself. "Let her go, or I will personally ensure every donor here knows exactly what kind of man you are." "You don't understand," Carlos tried, his voice taking on that smooth, reasonable tone he used in boardrooms. "She's confused. She's been manipulated." "We all saw the footage," another donor interrupted, a man in his 60s with a military bearing. "We heard the audio, and we're watching you right now, with your hand on her arm like she's your property. So I'm going to echo what this young man said. Enough." The murmurs became outcry, voices overlapping, phones still recording, the crowd shifting from spectators to witnesses to participants. They'd come for champagne and tax deductions. They were leaving with something heavier. Carlos's grip on Rose finally loosened, but not from conscience, from calculation. He was surrounded, outnumbered, recorded from every angle. The mask couldn't save him now, but maybe the performance could. He smiled, forced his body language to relax, raised his hands in a gesture of wounded innocence. "Rose, darling, if I've done anything to make you feel—" "Don't," Rose said, her voice steady now, strengthened by the crowd's support. "Don't you dare gaslight me in front of all these people." Carlos's smile cracked. The snarl started to return. His hand twitched toward Rose again, and Martins stepped fully between them, finger still raised, immovable as the fountain. "You'll have to go through me first." For a moment, everything balanced on a knife's edge. Carlos's rage versus his self-preservation, violence versus viral video, the old way versus the new truth. Carlos lunged, not at Rose this time, but at Martins, a shove, a wild swing, the uncontrolled rage of a man watching his empire crumble in real time. Dale moved fast, catching Carlos's arm, twisting it behind his back with practiced efficiency. "Sir, you need to stop, now. Get off me. I'll have you all arrested. but his threats were drowned out by a new sound. Sirens, rising from beyond the estate's hedges. Not one or two, a cascade of them coming closer. Someone had called the police. Maybe multiple someones. The crowd parted as emergency lights painted the fountain red and blue, as cruisers rolled up the pristine driveway, as officers emerged with the unhurried confidence of people who'd seen this exact scene play out 1,000 times in different settings. Rose stood beside Martins, trembling but upright, watching her husband finally face consequences. And Martins, the poor black Gardner, who had been invisible for so long, stood in the golden hour light with his finger still raised, having just named the unnameable, and watched the truth bloom like roses after rain. The fountain kept speaking its gentle language of water over stone. But for once, it wasn't the only voice being heard. The police officers moved with the kind of calm professionalism that comes from years of domestic calls. They assessed the scene in seconds. The trembling woman, the enraged man being restrained by security, the crowd with phones lifted, the evidence still echoing from hidden speakers. One officer, a woman with gray streaks in her hair and eyes that had seen too much, approached Rose directly. "Ma'am, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Rose shook her head, finding her voice. "No, I'm okay now." "Can you tell me what happened here tonight?" Before Rose could answer, Carlos's voice cut through, still trying to control the narrative even with Dale's hand firm on his shoulder. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding. My wife has been under a lot of stress, and our Gardner, that man there, has been feeding her paranoid delusions. I want him arrested for trespassing, for invasion of privacy, for—" "Sir, I'm not asking you right now," the officer said, her tone polite but immovable. "I'm asking your wife." The simplicity of it nearly broke Rose. "I'm asking your wife, not Mrs. Anderson, not the lady of the house. Your wife, a person with her own voice, her own truth." Rose looked at the crowd, at the phones still recording, at the live stream cameras that someone had turned back on. This was the moment, the hinge point. She could retreat into silence, play the role of the confused socialite, let Carlos spin this into a story about mental health and manipulation. Or she could speak. She thought about the burner phone in her clutch, about Martins offering her a way out, about every bruise hidden, every accident explained away, every time she'd smiled through pain because it was easier than facing the truth. Rose turned away from the officer and walked back toward the stage. Her legs felt unsteady, but she kept moving, kept climbing the steps until she stood behind the microphone again. The same microphone where, minutes ago, she'd declared her freedom. The crowd went quiet, waiting. Rose gripped the mic stand and spoke, her voice carrying across the lawn and out through the live stream to however many thousands were watching. "My name is Rose Anderson, and for the past 6 years I've been living in a cage made of money, status, and silence." Her voice wavered, but she pushed through. "The footage you saw tonight wasn't deep-faked. It wasn't manipulated. It was my life, documented by someone who saw what everyone else was trained to ignore." She found Martins in the crowd, standing near the fountain, with soil still on his clothes, and felt tears prick her eyes. "A gardener," she continued, "a man whose job was to tend roses and stay invisible. He planted something more valuable than any flower. He planted proof. He gave me a choice when I thought I had none. He said the word I'd been too afraid to say. Enough." The crowd was absolutely silent now. The only sound the fountain's gentle music and the distant static of police radios. To anyone watching this live stream who sees themselves in my story, Rose said, her voice growing stronger, there is a way out. It won't be easy. It won't be clean. But it exists. And there are people, sometimes the people you least expect, who will help you find it. She looked directly at Carlos, who stood rigid in Dale's grip, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. I am safe now, Rose repeated, the words carrying weight they hadn't had before. And I will not be returning home with you. Not tonight, not ever. The applause started slowly. One person, then another, then a wave of it. Ragged and human and completely unchoreographed. The kind of applause that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with witnessing survival. Rose was still standing at the microphone when a new commotion rippled through the crowd. People parting, making way for someone moving with purpose. A woman in her 60s emerged, silver hair pulled back, wearing a dove-gray suit and an expression carved from stone. Rose recognized her immediately. Margaret Chen, chairwoman of Anderson Technologies' board of directors. One of the most powerful women in tech, known for running board meetings like surgical strikes. Margaret walked straight to the stage, climbed the steps without asking permission, and took the microphone from Rose's hands. Her voice, when she spoke, had the weight of institutional authority behind it. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I've just concluded an emergency board vote via text. Yes, unorthodox, but necessary given the circumstances. She pulled out her phone and read from the screen. Effective immediately, Carlos Anderson is placed on indefinite leave from all positions at Anderson Technologies pending a full investigation into tonight's events and any related conduct. Gasps and murmurs from the crowd. Carlos's face went white, then red. Furthermore, Margaret continued, her tone allowing no interruption, Rose Anderson, or whatever name you choose to use going forward, has the full protection and support of this board. Any legal costs, security needs, or housing arrangements will be provided by the company's discretionary fund. She turned to Rose, her expression softening fractionally. You're not alone in this. Rose felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, but opening. She nodded, unable to speak. Margaret turned back to the crowd. And to any media present, this organization has zero tolerance for abuse in any form. We will cooperate fully with law enforcement, and we will be conducting an internal review of our executive oversight procedures. That's all. She handed the microphone back to Rose and descended the stage, walking directly to Carlos. Your company credentials are suspended. Security will escort you from the premises. You can't do this, Carlos snarled, finally breaking free of Dale's grip. I built this company. I am this company. No, Margaret said coolly. You were its CEO. Past tense. The company is bigger than you, Mr. Anderson, and it will survive without you. Carlos turned to the crowd, trying one last time to control the narrative. His voice took on that smooth, reasonable quality, the boardroom tone, the charm that had closed deals and won investors. This is a setup. That footage has been digitally altered, deep-faked by someone with a vendetta. My lawyers will prove... Mr. Anderson, a new voice cut through his speech. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. Professional attire, leather portfolio, the bearing of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms. My name is Diane Reyes. I'm representing Mrs. Anderson on a pro bono basis, and I have several items I'd like to enter into the public record. She opened her portfolio and pulled out documents. First, a medical evaluation conducted 3 days ago, time-stamped and notarized, documenting injuries consistent with physical assault. Second, a chain of custody log for the recording devices installed on this property, showing continuous operation and data backup to off-site servers. Third, testimony from 4 estate employees willing to testify about what they witnessed. Diane turned to the police officers. Officers, all of this documentation is available to support Mrs. Anderson's statement. The devices themselves are secured and ready for forensic examination if needed. The accusation died where it stood. Carlos's face cycled through expressions: rage, calculation, panic, before settling on something ugly and desperate. "Rose," he tried, his voice taking on a pleading quality that didn't reach his eyes. "Rose, please, we can work this out. Marriage counseling, therapy, whatever you need." "What I need," Rose said from the stage, her voice amplified, "is for you to never touch me again." The police officer who'd first approached Rose stepped forward, her partner moving to Carlos's other side. "Sir, based on what we've witnessed tonight and the documentation being presented, we're placing you under arrest for assault and battery." "You can't be serious!" Carlos tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The crowd had closed in, a wall of witnesses. "I'm Carlos Anderson. I donate millions to the Police Benevolent Fund. I have the mayor's personal number. Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back." "This is insane. These people are lying. That footage is fake. Dale, tell them it's fake. Security, get these cops off me." But Dale stood silent, his radio deliberately tucked away. The security team made no move to intervene. The contractors Carlos had hired were already melting into the crowd, wanting no part of what came next. The handcuffs clicked shut, with a sound like punctuation. Carlos raged against them, his composure completely shattered now. "You're making a mistake. I'll have all of your jobs. I'll sue this department into the ground. Rose, don't you dare walk away from me. We're not done. You hear me? We're not done." "Sir, you need to stop talking," the officer said, guiding him toward the cruiser. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." As they led him past the fountain, Carlos managed to twist around, his eyes finding Rose on the stage. His voice dropped to that familiar venomous hiss. "This isn't over. You think you've won? You'll regret this. I'll make sure you regret." But his threat dissolved into the cool stillness of the fountain's music, water flowing over stone, indifferent to rage and promises. The red and blue lights painted the roses in strange colors as the officers guided Carlos into the cruiser. His shouting muffled by closing doors, the crowd watched in silence, phones still recording, bearing witness. And Rose, standing on the stage where she'd been meant to perform gratitude and grace, instead performed something far more powerful. She watched her cage drive away with her abuser inside it, and she did not look away. The fountain kept speaking its ancient language, but for the first time in 6 years, Rose could hear her own voice above it. The media descended like locusts. News vans lined the street outside the Anderson estate by dawn, satellite dishes blooming from their roofs like mechanical flowers. Reporters shouted questions at anyone who emerged from the gates. Helicopters circled overhead, their cameras hunting for angles. The story had everything they craved: wealth, violence, a dramatic public fall, and footage that had already gone viral across every platform. Billionaire tech CEO arrested at charity gala. Hidden camera footage exposes years of abuse. Rose Anderson speaks out, a Gardner saved my life. Martins watched it all from the rose beds, pruning shears in hand, doing the work that had always steadied him. The Roses didn't care about headlines or viral videos. They needed deadheading, pest management, careful attention to the things that mattered. He could understand that. He could control that. A reporter had tried to approach him earlier, microphone thrust forward like a weapon. "Sir, you're the Gardner who exposed Carlos's Anderson, correct? Can you tell us what motivated you to—" "The Roses need tending," Martins had said quietly, turning back to his work. "Excuse me." He'd learned long ago that silence was its own kind of power. Let the cameras focus on the spectacle, on Carlos's perp walk, and Rose's tearful interviews, and the board's emergency statements. The truth was already planted. It would grow on its own now. Besides, there was real work to do. The climbing roses on the east trellis had come loose during last night's chaos. Too many people pressing close. Too much weight against the structure. Martins retensioned the wires with methodical precision, his hands remembering the rhythms his mother had taught him. Measure twice, secure once. Tend daily. Never leave a place worse than you found it. He was coiling excess wire when he heard footsteps on the gravel path. Rose approached slowly, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, the first time Martins had seen her in anything that wasn't carefully curated. She looked younger somehow, despite the exhaustion evident in her posture. "They're saying I should stay somewhere else," Rose said without preamble, "for my safety. The board arranged a hotel, but—" She trailed off, looking around the estate with an expression Martins couldn't quite read. "I don't want to be somewhere that feels like this, trapped behind walls and security checkpoints." Martins set down his tools. "What do you want?" Rose smiled, a real smile, tentative but genuine. "A garden. A small one. Something I can actually tend myself, not just look at through windows." She paused. "And maybe some help figuring out what comes next." They found the house 2 weeks later, after Rose had given her official statements and secured the restraining order and sat through more interviews than Martins could count. It was modest by any standard, almost laughably so compared to the Anderson estate. A 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of town with peeling paint and a yard that had gone wild from neglect. "It's perfect," Rose said, standing in the overgrown garden with her arms wrapped around herself. Not from fear this time, but from something else. Hope, maybe. Or possibility. Martins walked the perimeter, assessing. "The soil's good. Drainage needs work. That corner would be perfect for raised beds. Vegetables, maybe some herbs. And these—" He gestured to a tangle of what might have been roses once, now choked with weeds. "These can be saved. They just need someone to care for them again." Rose knelt beside the neglected roses, her fingers gentle on the thorny stems. "Can you teach me? Not just how to hold them without bruising. Everything. How to make things grow." "Yeah," Martins said softly. "I can do that." They spent the next month transforming the wild yard, working side by side in a way that had nothing to do with employer and employee and everything to do with shared purpose. Rose learned to prune, to mulch, to read the language of leaves. Martins taught her about root systems and companion planting and the kind of patience that gardening demands. And between the digging and planting, they talked about the foundation they wanted to build. "Restorative horticulture," Rose said one afternoon, her hands dirty and her face flushed from exertion. "Programs for survivors. Garden therapy, but also practical things. Security upgrades disguised as landscape projects. Hidden cameras that actually protect people instead of enabling their abusers. Training programs," Martins added, "teaching survivors the skills they need, horticulture, systems maintenance, anything that helps them rebuild. Give them tools, not just sympathy." Rose nodded, sketching notes on a pad balanced on her knee. And a hotline, staffed by people who know what silence costs, who won't tell someone to just leave if they're not ready. They named it the Enough Foundation. Simple, direct, true. Dale came to see Martins 3 weeks after the gala, showing up at the cottage unannounced with his security credentials in hand. "I resigned," Dale said without preamble. "Couldn't keep doing it. Not after," he gestured vaguely, encompassing everything. The years of looking away, the complicity, the moment he'd finally chosen the right side. Martins nodded, waiting. "The foundation you and Rose are building," Dale continued. "You'll need security protocols for the shelters you work with, actual protection, not the kind I was providing before." His voice roughened. "Let me do this. Let me fix even a fraction of what I helped break." "It doesn't pay much," Martins warned. "I don't need much. I need to sleep at night." Dale met his eyes. "I've got 23 years of experience. Let me use it for something that matters." Martins extended his hand. Dale shook it, and some of the weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. "Thank you," Dale said quietly, "for not giving up, even when people like me were making it harder." "People can change," Martins replied. "Gardner's taught me that. Dead-looking things can come back to life if you give them the right conditions." The board's offer came via courier, an embossed envelope delivered to the cottage by a woman in a suit who looked mildly scandalized by the overgrown driveway. Inside, a formal letter offering Martins the position of estate steward for the Anderson property. Full authority, 6-figure salary, benefits, housing. The works. Margaret Chen had included a handwritten note. "You saved more than one life that night. Let us honor that properly." Martins read it twice, standing in the small kitchen while Rose made tea from herbs they'd planted together. The offer was generous, life-changing by most measures. He set it down and looked out the window at their wild, hopeful yard. "They offered me the estate," he said. Rose turned from the stove. "And I'm going to decline." Martins smiled. "I've got more important gardens to tend." Rose's answering smile was radiant. "Co-founder has a nice ring to it." "Better than estate steward," Martins agreed. They clinked tea mugs, sealing the decision. Outside, the rescued roses were putting out new growth, tender, green, reaching toward light. The envelope arrived 2 days later, slipped under the cottage door in the early morning before either of them was awake. Plain Manila. No return address. No postmark. Inside, a single sheet of paper with a typed list. 6 addresses. All estates. All belonging to wealthy families Martins recognized from the society pages. And beside each address, a brief note. Carlisle Estate. Cameras disabled East Wing. 2:04 p.m. daily. Morrison Compound. Security logs show pattern of deletions. Hartwell Manor. Staff turnover 400% higher than comparable properties. Fletcher Estate. Medical supply orders inconsistent with household size. Rodriguez Villa. Multiple NDAs on file. Unusual clauses, Thornton House. Emergency calls routed through private line, not 911. At the bottom of the page, a single typed sentence. "The gardens you saved weren't the only ones that need tending." Martins stared at the list, his hands steady but his mind racing. 6 more estates. 6 more places where cameras conveniently glitched and silence was enforced. And someone, probably many someones, needed what he and Rose had built. He thought about his mother's words, "Never leave a place worse than you found it." He thought about how that promise had led him to the Anderson estate, to Rose, to this moment where everything had changed and nothing was finished. The Enough Foundation was just beginning. One garden, one survivor, one truth at a time. Martins folded the list carefully and tucked it into his pocket. Then he walked outside to where the morning light was just touching the roses, and he got back to work. Because healing, like gardening, is a practice of faith, and there was so much left to tend. The first workshop started at dawn, because that's when gardens are most honest. 8 women stood in the wild yard behind the cottage, hands uncertain, eyes cautious in the way Rose recognized. The perpetual assessment of exits, the habit of making yourself smaller. They'd come through referrals from Safe Harbor and 3 other shelters, each one carrying trauma like a second skin. Rose knew that weight. She still felt it some mornings, waking up and forgetting for a moment that she was safe, that the diamond choker was gone, that the cameras were finally on her side. "Thank you for coming," Rose said, keeping her voice gentle. "I know it's early. I know it's hard to trust new spaces, but I promise you, this garden is yours. No one will hurt you here." Martins stepped forward, carrying a flat of small potted roses. "These are cuttings propagated from the Anderson estate," he explained, "from the roses that witnessed everything. They're survivors, just like you, and today we're going to plant them together." He demonstrated the technique, loosening roots, preparing the hole, settling the plant with care. The women watched, some with visible skepticism, others with something that might have been hope. "Each one gets a tag," Martins continued, holding up small wooden markers and a permanent pen. "One word, whatever word you need right now, whatever word gives you strength." The first woman to step forward was in her 50s, gray streaking her dark hair, hands scarred from years of work Rose could only guess at. She took a cutting, knelt in the soil Martins had prepared, and began to dig. When she was done, she wrote on the tag in careful block letters, "Enough." The second woman, younger, wrote, "Brave." The third, "Free." One by one, they planted. One by one, they chose their words. Survivor. Strong heard "safe mine." This from a woman barely 20, tears streaming down her face as she pressed the soil firm around her rose. Rose knelt beside them, her own hands in the earth, planting her own cutting. She'd thought for a long time about what word to choose. There were so many she could have written: free, survivor, grateful. But in the end, she chose the one that had started everything. Enough. When all 8 roses were planted, the women stood back, looking at what they'd created. A small garden, barely 10 feet square. But it belonged to them. They'd built it with their own hands. "These will grow," Martins said quietly. "Some seasons they'll struggle. Some years they'll bloom so much, you'll have to give flowers away. But they'll survive. Because you gave them what they needed: good soil, careful tending, and time." One of the women, the youngest, who'd written "mine," looked up at him. "What if we're not good at this? What if we kill them?" "Then we plant again," Rose said. "Gardens are forgiving. They teach us that failure isn't final. That you can start over as many times as you need to." The woman nodded, wiping her eyes, and Rose saw it. The small crack in the armor, the tentative belief that maybe, possibly, she could be more than what had been done to her. The workshop continued through the morning. Basic techniques, care schedules, the kind of practical knowledge that would let them take these skills home. But more than that, it gave them something Rose had lacked for so long: a community. Women who understood. Women who wouldn't ask, "Why didn't you just leave?" Because they knew how impossible simple questions could be. As the sun climbed higher, turning the wild yard golden, Rose looked at the row of newly planted roses and felt something shift in her chest. Not healing. That would take years, maybe a lifetime. But the beginning of it. The first green shoot breaking through concrete. 2 weeks after the first workshop, the interview request came. Rose had been doing media selectively, turning down the sensational outlets, the ones that wanted tears and drama, choosing instead the platforms that might actually help someone. When the producer from the national morning show reached out, promising a focus on resources rather than spectacle, Rose had agreed. Martins drove her to the studio, watching her grip the door handle with white knuckles the entire way. "You don't have to do this," he said at a red light. "You've already done more than most people ever could." "I know," Rose replied, "but someone watching might need to hear it. Someone might be where I was 6 months ago, thinking there's no way out." The interview was scheduled for the living room segment. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, the kind of setting designed to feel intimate. The host, a woman named Patricia, who'd built her career on empathy rather than gotcha moments, greeted Rose warmly. Martins watched from backstage as the cameras rolled. "Rose Anderson, thank you for being here," Patricia began. "6 months ago, footage from your husband's charity gala went viral. Can you walk us through what that night meant for you?" Rose took a breath, centered herself. That night was the first time I'd spoken my truth publicly, and it was terrifying. But I had help from a Gardner named Martins Adeyemi, who saw what everyone else was trained to ignore. From a security chief who finally chose conscience over a paycheck. From a legal team who believed me. From donors who became witnesses. What do you want people to understand about domestic abuse that they might not already know? Rose leaned forward slightly, her voice clear and measured. That it doesn't always look like what you expect. My abuser was charming, successful, philanthropic. He donated to women's shelters while controlling every aspect of my life. The abuse wasn't constant. It was calculated. And the isolation was so gradual, I didn't realize I was trapped until someone showed me the door. What would you say to someone watching who recognizes themselves in your story? That there is a way out, Rose said simply. It might not be today. It might not be next week. But it exists. And there are people ready to help. Shelters, hotlines, advocates who will believe you. You don't have to have a perfect plan. You just have to take one step. Patricia nodded. You've started the Enough Foundation. Can you tell us about that? It's a restorative horticulture program for survivors of domestic violence, Rose explained. We teach gardening skills, provide job training, and help implement security measures disguised as landscape projects. But more than that, we're building community, showing people that growth is possible, that given time and tending, you can survive and even thrive. That's beautiful, Patricia said. Is there anything else you want to share? Rose looked directly at the camera. If you're in danger right now, please reach out. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-799-7233. They're available 24 hours and to Polish. You deserve safety, you deserve peace, and you deserve a life that belongs to you. The interview ended, but the impact rippled outward immediately. The hotline number appeared on screen. The Foundation's website URL scrolled across the bottom. And somewhere, Martins knew, someone was watching and recognizing themselves and maybe, finally, choosing to reach for help. The donor meeting happened in the cottage's small living room because Rose had insisted. No ballrooms, no grand estates, no performances. Just truth, plainly told. 15 potential donors sat on mismatched furniture, their designer clothes incongruous against the simple setting. These were the people who'd been at the gala, who'd watched everything unfold, who now wanted to help, but weren't sure how. Martin stood near the window, letting Rose lead. But when she invited him to speak about the Foundation's approach, he found himself addressing the very people who'd looked past Rose's suffering for years. "I want to tell you something uncomfortable," Martins began. "You weren't blind to what was happening. You were trained not to see it." The room went still. "Carlos Anderson was a master of misdirection," Martins continued. "He threw charity galas while committing violence at home. He donated to shelters while keeping his wife trapped. And all of you, successful, intelligent, well-meaning people, participated in the system that enabled him. Not because you were evil, because you'd been taught that wealth equals virtue, that public generosity erases private cruelty, that someone else's marriage is none of your business." A woman in the back shifted uncomfortably. "So what are you saying? That we're complicit?" "I'm saying that complicity is often passive," Martins replied. "It's the dinner party where you don't ask about the bruise. It's the gala where you don't question why cameras malfunction. It's the board meeting where you don't push back on concerning behavior because the numbers look good." "That's harsh," someone muttered. "It's honest," Rose interjected quietly, "and I don't say it to shame anyone. I say it because recognition is the first step. You can't change what you won't acknowledge." Martins nodded. "Gardens retrain us to see differently. They teach us patience, attention to detail, the importance of tending things before they break. That's what this foundation does. It retrains people to notice, to care, to intervene before tragedy becomes inevitable." He paused, looking around the room. "If you want to help, we need more than money. We need you to go back to your communities and look closer. Notice the patterns. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Be the person who says enough before someone has to risk everything to say it themselves." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then the woman who'd questioned him stood. "My company has an executive whose wife is always clumsy," she said slowly. "I've made jokes about it. Maybe she needs better shoes. I've never—" She stopped, her face pale. "I'll look into it." "Actually, look." Others nodded. One by one, they began to see, really see, what they'd been trained to overlook. Night had fallen by the time the last donor left. Martins and Rose sat on the cottage's small porch, watching the yard they'd transformed together. The foundation hotline, a simple phone mounted in the spare room, began to ring. Rose went to answer it, her voice gentle and sure. "Enough, Foundation. This is Rose. Yes, we can help. Tell me what you need." Martins stayed on the porch, looking at the roses they'd planted. The cuttings from the Anderson estate had taken root, putting out new growth. In the moonlight, he could just make out the tags, the words survivors had chosen. Enough. Brave, free mine. The phone rang again, and again, each call a life reaching out, a voice breaking silence, a seed planted in fertile ground. Martins thought about his mother's promise, the one that had brought him to the Anderson estate and led him through everything that followed. Never leave a place worse than you found it. He'd kept that promise, not just for one estate, but for every person touched by the foundation, every survivor who learned to tend gardens and themselves, every donor who learned to see, every call that came through in the darkness, answered by someone who understood. The narrative eye of the story drifted over the yard, over rose canes threading up the new trellis Rose and Martins had built together, over soil turned and tended, over plants that had been neglected and were now thriving, over a small cottage where the lights stayed on late, where the phone kept ringing, where help was offered freely to anyone who needed it. In the spare room, Rose's voice continued, patient and steady. Yes, we have resources. Yes, you can leave. Yes, there are people who will help. Martin stood and walked to the garden, kneeling beside the roses. He touched one of the stems, still tender, still new, but growing stronger each day. The thorns were coming in, protection earned through survival. Given time and tending, he whispered to the roses, to the night, to anyone who might need to hear it. Even the softest stem can split stone. And somewhere in the darkness, another seed was germinating. Another truth was preparing to break through concrete. Another voice was learning to say the word that changes everything. Enough.